This time on the season finale of Hellfire Heroes.
This is crazy.
Firefighters and survivors share stories of heroism.
There's flames over there, eh?
And heartbreak.
The realization that we lost everything was devastating.
In the past decade, forest fires across Canada have increased in frequency and intensity.
This region is for sure one of the top producers of wildfires.
We live with fire every day.
Oh my God.
In 2011, a massive fire invades Slave Lake, Alberta, and destroys 40% of the homes and businesses in town.
It's just freaking insane.
5 years later, the Fort McMurray fire becomes the most expensive natural disaster in Canadian history.
Look at that! Oh my God! It's gonna burn down!
And in the summer of 2017, more than 1,300 fires burn over 12,000 square kilometers in British Columbia. And the fire chiefs have a message,
You've just got to have a plan in place.
because it's not if the next one will hit, it's when.
It is absolutely crazy. Everything is on fire.
Oh my God, dude. Feel how hot that is?
July 2017. Hot, dry weather, strong winds, and a rash of lightning strikes ignite more than 140 wildland fires in the central interior of British Columbia. Despite a rapid deployment of resources and personnel, the fires soon burn out of control.
Hey, you guys come over this way, okay?
And Chelsea Leslie and her family are not prepared.
We did not have a plan for evacuation. We had a plan to stay.
Chelsea lives with her husband Dan and 11 children on a homestead near Risky Creek, a farming and First Nations community located on the Fraser River. And if the family is forced to evacuate, it's not just the children they have to worry about.
We have over 100 animals. How would that even practically look? How would we choose which animals to bring? Do we choose the pigs? Do we leave the chickens? They're like strange things to have to think about.
There's a forest fire there. There is a forest fire here. There is also a forest fire up here. So we are basically completely surrounded by forest fires.
Within 48 hours, the fires are at Chelsea's door.
I phoned my sister, and they were evacuated within 45 minutes of me phoning. That's how fast these fires are moving. I don't even know what we would do. I do not know what we would do.
You've just got to have a plan in place. It's just very simple. It's not like you have to have a 300-point plan to, to evacuate your home. But the question becomes, if you do, how are you doing it?
It is 2 o'clock in the morning on, I guess it's Monday. Dan went online and found out that there was an evacuation order that basically covered the entire area we live. And a couple of minutes later, the police showed up to let us know that we had about a 2-hour window to get out of the area before the fires potentially came through and blocked our path out.
90 minutes southeast of Risky Creek, in the town of 100 Mile House. Shane Gunn, a member of the local search and rescue team, is called into action.
I did receive a call from our search and rescue manager letting me know that we are going to be evacuating, and then that just really set me off.
As fires continue to spread, Shane and his team spend long hours on the road, warning residents of the imminent danger.
The fires seemed to be chasing us around for weeks on end. Every time we turned around, a new fire was breaking out, living in that smoky air all the time. And you'd see it on the faces of our search and rescue people. It got old.
And when many ranchers refuse to evacuate, the job gets even tougher.
Their whole livelihood all depends on that land that they're on. So we knew we were going to run into some roadblocks, some challenges, explaining to somebody who's been on a piece of land for 100 years that they need to leave.
Oh, there.
Shane's neighbor, Ed Monacle, wasn't going anywhere.
Good to see you.
See you too. We had no intention of leaving. That's all we own, is our livelihood. You lose it, you lose everything. You can't replace generations of work. So you're gonna stay and fight for it.
You know, when we go up and knock on a door, or the police knock on a door, and somebody says, I'm not leaving, do you get into a conflict with that person and say you're coming, where, you know, we put you in cuffs and we drag you out? Or do you have a conversation and alert them to the hazards? And if they don't evacuate, what could possibly happen?
Well, the person that came to us was a police officer. Then he took some information from us. And he asked for what dentists we dealt with for dental records, because they could identify the corpses. That was a little scary.
People that want to stay, if they're very adamant about staying, we have to make them understand that we may not be able to get back in to get them out.
With the fires closing in, Ed and his family dig in for a fight.
I called it Infernal behind our house here, and it was strong. It was pretty intense, and then when it did come, it sounded like a goddamn jet plane taking off. While the Infernal was going by, I asked my son to move a piece of equipment. So he did that, and then he turned around and saw this, and he took a picture of it. We just couldn't believe it. Flames are right there, and it was pretty darn scary.
For first responders working in this region of British Columbia, reaching out to small communities spread far and wide was a challenge. But back in Slave Lake, Alberta, in 2011, the evacuation unfolded in a different manner.
This is the only highway that's currently open out of Slave Lake. If this shuts down, we may be spending the night on the highway.
Slave Lake had a population of nearly 7,000, and there are only 3 highways out of town.
Everything's blowing in on us. Communication is breaking down. Public's coming to us for answers that we don't have.
There's just so much confusion and people everywhere, and human nature taking over, and pure fear, and women and kids crying and freaking out because their house was on fire when they left.
And in Fort McMurray, Alberta, in 2016, a city of over 125,000 residents, the challenge was tenfold.
So if you look at the challenge of evacuating communities, you know, look at Fort McMurray. That was huge.
Getting the out of Dodge, I can feel the heat here. This is crazy.
You dumped the whole city down a highway. It was huge, and it was the same highway that you went out that you came in.
Fort McMurray was the largest single wildfire evacuation in Canadian history.
When you look at that confined space of people and moving them down the highway, that was a challenge. Kudos to all of them for getting those people out.
Every year, wildfires burn an average of 2.5 million hectares across Canada.
Fires don't just happen in Alberta and British Columbia. They happen in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, PEI, Ontario, Quebec.
In 2013, massive wildfires in northern Quebec burned more than 400,000 hectares of remote wilderness. And in 2009, when a major fire threatens Halifax, thousands flee for their lives.
It's all around us. Oh, damn! Holy! Get out of here! Get in! Get in! Get in! Go! Go!
The main driver of wildfires is the boreal forest, which runs from Alaska to Newfoundland. And as industry spreads deeper into the forest, more people are affected by wildfires. Near Risky Creek in central British Columbia, the 2017 wildfires forced Chelsea and her family to flee their homestead. Chelsea's husband Dan and their eldest son return about 2 days after the evacuation orders to protect their farm and animals.
It's at 4 kilometer mark. This is all active burning. It just doesn't stop.
When we came back, coming through the roadblocks, the police officer, they're not supposed to really let you back in once you leave. You know, he said, well, it's at your own risk. And understand that if you go in and something's happening to you, nobody's coming in to get you.
As they pass through the roadblocks, Dan is not sure what to expect.
You can actually see across like 10 feet on the road there. So basically, I've just been building our own fire suppression setup for our ranch.
Dan and his son work at putting out hotspots. The fire surrounds the property, but the animals are okay.
Father and son did exactly what they needed to mitigate the risks of their property. You know, they actioned the fire that they needed to action. They protected what they needed to protect. They had a tank on their farm. They had a pump. They had hose. They were prepared to do battle. The question is, at what point in time are you going to retreat?
About an hour west of Risky Creek, fires also threaten the Cledenco First Nation. But it isn't just the fire they're worried about.
Policeman came to our door and told us to leave. I said, I'm not going to do it. If I leave my house, I said, I got nowhere to go. He said, I'll put you guys in jail if you don't want to leave. It was a bad feeling.
Time to go, folks. You can't stay here.
Chief Joe Alphonse refuses to evacuate. But the authorities respond with a threat to forcibly remove the children from the community.
Because of our history of residential school, that's a very real threat to our community members.
The trauma of families torn apart in the past is still very present in the heart of First Nations communities. So Chief Joe stands his ground and drives off the RCMP.
But you can't just not evacuate, you have to prepare. So since 2010, we've trained probably about 400 of our community members. We said, we're gonna do this, we're gonna fight this, and we need to protect our communities. There's nobody better than ourselves to fight.
Moments before the battle begins, Chief Joe gathers his crews for a rallying cry.
I told them, today, you guys go out on that fire and you fight that fire. You're protecting our community, you're protecting our women, our children, and our elders. That's what warriors do. That's the definition of a warrior.
The Indigenous people understand fire. They understand the area. They understand how that area grows and how it's destroyed if a fire comes through. And they made that decision based on that information because they have planned and they have prepared for this.
University of British Columbia ecologist Dr. Laurie Daniels is no stranger to the history of Indigenous people and Canadian wildfires.
Here in BC, it became illegal for people to start forest fires. And that policy was really targeted at Indigenous people to try to remove their traditional use of fire from the landscape. It was punishable by death to be caught lighting fires.
By looking at tree rings, Dr. Daniels has made some startling discoveries.
I'm sure many people have had an opportunity to look at a stump of a tree and count the rings to figure out how old that tree is. Well, we can go way beyond that. We can also find patterns from fires in the past where the trees have been scarred and damaged by fire and leaves a long-term record going back decades and centuries when those fires burned.
Dr. Daniels and her team have tracked changes in the frequency and intensity of wildfires, dating back many hundreds of years.
This is specialized software that allows us to mark the boundaries of every single ring to determine the exact year, moving back through time and determining when those fires burned. So in this example, here's the center of the tree, and the first ring that it formed was in 1826. Well, here in this year, this part of the tree was killed in 1833, And the formation of the arcs afterwards are what gives us an embedded fire scar that tells us the exact year that that fire burned. And then it burned 3 times in 1833, 1848, and 1863. So it survived 3 fires in the first 40 years of its life. And then there's absolutely no fire scars between 1863 and 1996 when the tree died. So 140 years with no fire scars. In many of those areas where we've looked at fire scar records, the fire stopped in the early 1900s. So we've had a century where the forest has been changing, where fuels have accumulated, the trees have become denser and denser, and we've essentially turned a campfire into a bonfire.
Back in British Columbia, the fires have been burning for a week and have spread across thousands of hectares. Despite all their efforts, first responders are losing the battle.
They had 1 fire on the first day, but how do you control 140 fires after that? And the rest of the communities where all those lightning strikes took place over British Columbia creates a large issue.
Near the community of 100 Mile House, a 5,000-hectare fire is now coming dangerously close to the town and the lumber mill.
You can't lose a mill like that in our community. It's what's powering our town. So we took all of our equipment, all of our resources, our men, got everything to site as soon as possible.
Jason Hinchy is a local logging contractor. When the BC Wildfire Service reached out to him, he didn't hesitate.
There was a power line that went right in behind both of the mills and goes all the way through towards Highway 97. So it is a natural break there. That was the last line of defense before town.
Jason and every logger in town worked day and night to clear a fire guard 6 kilometers long and over 50 meters wide along the power line. And on July 13th, opportunity knocked.
I got a call from the fire behavior specialist saying, yeah, this will probably be the day.
With the winds in their favor, Scott Rennick and his team prepare to set a controlled burn.
What we'll do is actually intentionally put fire into areas to burn out between the control lines we establish and the actual wildfire. There was a slight wind towards the fire, but it was also relatively calm. In those conditions, we'll actually use ignition patterns to actually build convection, so we'll actually create our own wind, essentially.
Flame-throwing helicopters ignite circles of fire. These circles of fire morph into columns of intense heat. Next, a line of fire is ignited, parallel to the chain of heat columns. And the heat from the columns sucks in air and pulls the new ignition line towards it, creating a barrier capable of stopping the oncoming wildfire.
And that develops its own inflow wind and started pulling everything into it. And that's how we were able to successfully burn it off.
If you look at 100 Mile House, that fire guard saved everything. It saved the town, it saved the mill, it stopped the fire from coming into the town.
The BC wildfires of 2017 were the worst wildfires in the history of the province. Every year, wildfires rage across 2.5 million hectares of Canadian forests. And the first line of defense? The provincial wildland firefighters. Dan Weisgerber spent 5 years on the front lines for the BC Wildfire Service, including the historic 2017 season, where he was deployed in the Vanderhoof area, 100 kilometers west of Prince George.
We could hear all these fires being called in. There's fire after fire after fire after fire, so we go, okay, there's gonna be a lot of work to do. The wind kind of changed and the fire started gaining some intensity.
Oh my God, we can see flames from here. Guys, there's flames over there, hey?
I don't think anyone expected the fire to get as crazy as it did.
It's just a ridge line of fire all the way across.
Firefighters call it blowing up, because we kind of liken it to the atom bomb. There was nothing we could possibly do that would stop that fire. You just have to accept that There are days where you're gonna essentially lose.
No wildland firefighter can enjoy a long career unless he understands how fires move and spread. One of the first safety rules a firefighter learns is to avoid working uphill of a fire, because fire travels uphill a lot faster than on flat ground. But the reason why is one of Mother Nature's best-kept secrets. At the U.S. Forest Service's Fire Sciences Lab in Missoula, Montana, Dr. Torben Grumstrup has built a simple device which reveals the secret behind the fire's uphill speed.
Fire, when it's on flat ground, more or less it rises straight up into the air. And that's because, as we all know, hot air rises. But you can see that when we tilt the table up, two things happen. One, we can see that the flames, instead of going straight up into the air, they actually lay over and come in contact with the table. And the other part of that we can't see with the naked eye, but becomes visible with the shadowgraph technique, is that the gases do the same thing.
It's the difference between the air pressure above and below the flames that causes the flames to bend over and stick to the slope.
What this means in a wildfire scenario is that these flames and the hot gases that they produce are much closer to the fuel, the unburned fuel that's ahead of the wildfire. And that causes the fire to spread up the slope much faster than it would on flat ground.
Under certain conditions, an uphill wildfire can accelerate without warning and reach speeds as high as 20 kilometers an hour, making it impossible to outrun.
This is a major safety concern for firefighters who are working on wildfires in the field.
Some of a forest firefighter's best friends are the pilots working in the skies above them, in airplanes and helicopters. Whether dropping buckets of water, loads of retardant, ignition fuel, or monitoring the progress and direction of the blaze, aerial firefighters are an essential part of any major wildfire response, and none are more versatile than helicopters.
We get out on a big forest fire and there's all kinds of planes and helicopters, and we call that aluminum overcast. If you get out on a fire and it's aluminum overcast, it means that we got a lot of help and a lot of equipment helping us out.
In 2011, wildfires stormed the town of Slave Lake, Alberta. Nearly half of the city is burned to the ground. In the aftermath, Fire Chief Jamie Coots' teenage son, Ryan, is changed forever.
You know, I can remember the exact second when I was like, yeah, this kid's gonna be a fireman.
That fateful moment occurred on May 20th, 2011, when a helicopter crashed into Slave Lake.
I knew he was gonna be a fireman the day the helicopter crashed. You know, at that point, he's 15 years old. All our crews were dispatched, all our people were working, and I'd said to him, get your gear, put it by the truck.
I grabbed the backboard and I just started following them down. I kind of looking in the water, and then all of a sudden you could kind of see like just a yellow haze, little bubble in the water.
EMS crews were already on site to rescue 57-year-old pilot Jean-Luc Debat.
They were just pulling him out of the water. And as soon as I got there, they put him on that backboard and brought him all the way to the Slave Lake Hospital, working on him on my backboard.
But the pilot didn't make it.
Everyone talks about the first fatality they go to, and I think it's just something that stays with you, I think. The helicopter crash was definitely life-changing.
It is absolutely crazy. Everything is on fire.
Since 1900, about 7,500 wildfires have burned all across Canada every single year. Most of the fires burn deep in the wilderness, where they go unnoticed by the general public.
But when you start to encroach on communities in British Columbia, communities in Ontario, communities in Newfoundland, communities in Nova Scotia, it's affecting a population. When you look at it, it's that, oh my heavens, what do we do now?
And perhaps no community has been affected more dramatically than Fort McMurray in 2016. In May 2016, helicopter pilot Paul Spring was recruited to help fight two colossal wildfires that were tearing through his hometown of Fort McMurray.
Everybody in town was fighting the Fort McMurray fires. You know, once the fires hit Fort McMurray, every helicopter company that could fly was flying. I think we got up to about 80 helicopters at one time on the fire. From the air is surreal. When you're flying around a fire, you have no concept of what's going on in the ground. You can see it, but you're missing the sense of panic, the smell, the sounds. You can see houses burning. You're almost like this voyeur flying around and you're watching this fire burn. You go, how many people are gonna die? You just get this gut feeling that this is bad, bad, bad. And after everything clears, we're gonna start finding bodies in basements.
No one died in the fires of Fort McMurray, but while Paul Spring piloted his helicopter above the burning communities, firefighter Mark Stevenson was on the ground, trying to save his neighbors' homes and property.
There was massive fires everywhere, all structure fires.
The question is, how wide is this sucker? She's not coming up behind us, too.
Decided to go down my neighborhood, Abbotswood Drive, just to see if that's where we could make our stand. We're driving down my block. We get down there and I notice that looking at my house, it's on fire. It's the first one on the block and it's fully engulfed.
In a cruel twist of fate, firefighter Mark Stevenson found himself fighting the fires in his own neighborhood.
I was kind of expecting the worst, and when I got there, and my fear's the wrong word, but my expectations were met properly. You know, it is what I expected. My house was on fire. At that moment, my captain got out of the truck to come stand beside me, put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, "Do you need a moment?" And I said, "No, there's nothing we can do here. It's all stuffed and it's all gone. So let's go make a stand somewhere else. There's more we can do for somebody else's homes."
For Stevenson and the other firefighters working Fort McMurray that day, one single event, more than any other, marked the moment when they feared the fires were getting the upper hand.
Nobody believed it would jump that river. Somehow it found a way. That's when things started to get really serious for us. Just the sheer magnitude of the fire, I think it surprised everyone. There's a lot of black spruce in that area. They got those cones on them. When they go up, they kind of explode and they just send embers and flames everywhere.
As the fire raged, it sent burning embers and firebrands flying across the Athabasca River at a point where it was nearly 500 meters across. Stoked by high winds, embers have been observed to travel a staggering 11 kilometers from the head of a fire. And their role in the spread of fire and their threat to structures is well known. Researchers at Oregon State University are using infrared photography to learn more about how embers form and spread. Invisible to the naked eye, infrared images reveal the sheer volume of embers emitted and hint at the damage they can do.
An ember the size of a raisin or a grape can burn a house down. If it lands properly and lands in proximity to a fuel, one ember can start a major fire.
Fire science researchers use this giant ember generator, AKA the Dragon, to study the destructive power of burning embers when they make contact with a home structure. The Dragon, which feeds on a steady diet of wood chips and mulch, is helping researchers to develop new and better defenses against the embers.
You may have some bark mulch around your house and it's tinder dry. That ember lands in it, that ember ignites, now your bark mulch burns. You have vinyl siding on your home, the bark mulch extends into the vinyl siding, which goes up very quickly into the soffit of your house, which is vinyl, and into the roof structure, and your house burns down.
While fireproof siding can be expensive, simply keeping flammable materials away from the house can significantly reduce the risk of fire. Back in British Columbia, the wildfires of 2017 are bearing down on the Clayton Cove First Nation.
Fire surrounded 3/4 of our whole community.
After resisting the orders to evacuate and abandon their homes, the entire community bands together to battle the raging inferno.
We were in the middle of a fire on both sides because it was so smoky.
At the time, it must have been like 100 kilometers of fire.
It's just right there, right on the side of the road. That is nuts.
It was a crazy summer, especially when the fire jumped the river. It sounded like a war zone around here. You hear helicopters 24/7.
Despite the situation, the Clayton Co. persevered, undaunted by repeated and insistent orders to evacuate.
It's going to be us against the world, basically, and we're prepared to do everything on our own. We hired cooks, we hired firefighters. Each crew would have a 5-pack with a 1-ton truck, 3 piss cans in the back. We'd have a chainsaw, 3 shovels, 3 Pulaskis, and we laid down fire guard after fire guard right around our whole community.
As the days turned to weeks, the fires raged on and showed no sign of weakening or retreating.
And I think it was during that time that it got really tense. You know, you have to take it hour by hour, shift by shift, day by day. And we ended every day with drum song and prayers, you know.
The battle that Chief Joe and his community are fighting today is one we've all been waging for decades. And according to the scientists, part of the problem is we're getting too good at it.
In recent decades, we have been highly successful at detecting and putting out forest fires. So now we've taken fire out of the landscape, we've made all the forest mature, and when the trees die, they begin to dry out. As the wood falls, it becomes fuel load down on the ground. It's primed for the bonfire as opposed to the campfire.
Not only has our success at putting out forest fires caused a buildup of the dry fuels that feed the fires, it's increased the frequency and intensity of the fires. For Lori Daniels and many of her colleagues, if some remote parts of the forest are allowed to burn and to regrow, the forest would regain its biodiversity, a natural deterrent to many of the largest wildfires we're experiencing today.
Imagine if you could do a bird's eye view down onto the forest. Would look like puzzle pieces, where each puzzle piece would be a forest of a different age and forest composition and stage of development, and they all have different fuels. So if a fire is burning through the landscape, they can burn intensely through one area and then hit a patch of forest that's maybe younger, has more broadleaf aspen trees in it, and is less likely to burn. So having a mosaic and variety on the landscape reduces the chance that we get these large, fast-moving fires that are so difficult to control.
As industry and communities continue to expand into the wildlands of Canada, it's becoming more and more important to safeguard property and lives, while recognizing the long-term benefit of understanding and accommodating the natural life cycle of our forests.
We need to look at how we can live in harmony with nature, and do we have to look at actually going back to letting nature take care of some of these forests?
It will never be possible to completely eradicate wildfires, but a progressive approach to forest ecology could reduce their size and intensity, and perhaps even prevent the kind of suffering that Angie Thorne experienced in Ashcroft, British Columbia in the long summer of 2017.
I came up and stood right about here, and I looked across. You could see those little trees there. And I witnessed my house being totally engulfed in flames. That's when I took this picture here. I posted them on my Facebook. I can't remember what my words were, but I said my house is burning.
A longtime resident of Ashcroft, Angie Thorne was not allowed to return home until the fires had died down, 3 days after she left.
On July 10th, we got word that we can go up to our place for the first time. I was nervous most of the day, knowing that we were going to see for the first time the damage that the fire did. I knew there were some houses missing, but I didn't know exactly which ones. And then We pulled into the yard, and this was all black, just black from the devastation. And what we seen was, only thing we seen was our chimney pipe standing up. Just the realization that we lost everything was devastating, even though my granddaughter said, you know, as long as we're okay, Mama, that's all that matters. I wish my boys were here with me.
For people in communities decimated by wildfires, getting back on their feet, feeling safe again, and having hope for the future can seem like an impossible challenge.
A community burning down, that has a huge impact to the, you know, the human side of that, or the human aspect. And the things that go with it, the PTSD of those people that live in that community and the responders that went in there, it's a whole different ballgame now.
Rebuilding homes and lives can be difficult, especially for those who live in areas where the threat of wildfire returns every summer. But fire ecology scientists are working hard to build new tools to help safeguard our wildland communities. Dan Thompson is a forest fire research scientist at the Northern Forestry Center in Edmonton, Alberta.
So what we're doing is we're building a fire in a computer. And so we're simulating, you know, how wind moves across the environment. Those are the sort of natural winds on your sort of windy day.
Thompson is working with a program called FireTech that uses computer modeling to help communities better prepare for the risks posed by wildfires.
Basically, what we show here is how well the model can recreate a past fire, and that gives us the confidence that we need to go into the future and say to a community that wants to invest in wildfire prevention.
Computer models like these can help towns in wildfire zones like Slave Lake, Alberta, avoid future disasters by helping them increase the efficiency of their preventative burns and fire guards.
It's all about that hazard reduction, right? So it's a few things for us. It gets the smoke in the air to remind the people that it's time to start being careful and start preparing their own homes. And then it also leaves us with an excellent fire guard and a reduced fuel load.
In the BC fires of 2017, Chelsea Leslie and her family were among the lucky ones, whose home and property narrowly escaped the fires.
Hey guys, it's Chelsea from Little Mountain Ranch here at last. I'm not dead. The farm's still here. All is good. And we are back at home again.
The day that it actually happened, I just remember Dan telling me, guess what? It got, the evacuation order was lifted. We get to go home.
We at Little Mountain Ranch have something to tell you guys. How many days have we been evacuated? Well, that's 47 days. 47 days today, everybody. But today we get to go where? We get to go home.
Now that they're home, the Leslies are turning their efforts towards better protecting their homestead from the next wildfire.
So this was the first area that we tried selective logging. So basically thinning out the trees rather than just clear cutting it. And the purpose behind logging like this, from what we understand, and I'm in no way an expert at all, but is to make it so it's more difficult for the fires to move across the crowns of the trees.
This is a fire hazard. You can imagine how that would go up, on a dry summer day.
Before these fires happened, just the thought of cutting a tree down just broke my heart. Dan and I had many conversations about that I didn't want to be cutting down a bunch of trees. But what I've learned since then is that there's a way that you can manage forests in a way that can protect from forest fire, but still allow the forest to be full of life and full of trees.
But even with new plans and measures in place, the memory of last year's fire is a constant reminder to always be prepared. Because it's not a question of if another wildfire comes, it's when.
I think we understand our vulnerability more than we ever did before. So we just look at life differently. We place value on things differently. And then from a practical standpoint, how we're actually choosing to live our life on a day-to-day basis is completely different than it was prior to the fires.
Not if, but when, is the wildfire mantra that Chelsea lives by, and a warning for everyone living within Canada's vast boreal forest.
We have to go. Oh my God, look at the fire. Oh my God.
Because the fires, whether ignited by lightning or by the spark of an ATV, are sure to come. As scientists and firefighters develop a better understanding of the role of wildfires in the ecology of the boreal forest, it seems clear that communities across Canada must search for ways to coexist with fire.
Can you imagine the battle that we can wage against these fires, or better yet, the prevention that we can wage against these fires by properly adhering to the forest and that forest regeneration based on how nature's been doing it for thousands of years?
For the Clayton Cove First Nation, the long battle to defend their homes against last summer's wildfires was a success.
We didn't lose one home, we didn't lose one shed, and not one individual got injured. If we left as the RCMP wanted us, I figured we would have lost 80% of our homes. If we lost 80% of our homes, our community we'd never recover.
But now, with a new wildfire season looming before them, they're looking to the past.
Generation after generation, our people have used fire for management purposes, and we've also, living amongst fire, have to know how to deal with fire. On the other hand, get ready. Global warming's here. This is not going away anytime soon.
Indigenous people have lived with fire for generations, and they understand fire. They understand the concept of forest regeneration and how fire helps that. We need to talk to all Indigenous communities that are out there and get that input from them and use that.
Cities like Fort McMurray are looking for ways to balance the economic and recreational rewards of living in the forest with the challenges of rebuilding for the future.
When you fly over the town today and you're looking down, obviously it's much different. You know, the trees, we used to be in a forest, now we're in a burnt out forest, but the regrowth is coming, and so are the houses. The houses are coming back, and the town will be better prepared next time that there is a fire to fight it.
This was the lot where I got to stand and watch my house burn down.
2 years after losing his family's first home, firefighter Mark Stevenson has just finished rebuilding their second home on the same lot.
We live on the end of a dead-end road overlooking a river valley. It was no-brainer to me to rebuild in the same location. This is my little corner of Fort McMurray, and I want to keep it.
Since the fires of 2016, the city of Fort McMurray has instituted a number of measures, like creating fire breaks and removing dead trees, aimed at protecting its residents from the next wildfire.
With the science of today, when you look at it, and scientists saying that if a fire occurs and you can allow it to burn, let it burn, that's good science. Because we're letting it go back to the natural progression and that natural regeneration that was taking place that controlled the forest.
For the country as a whole, the best act of prevention might be to learn to accept the natural and beneficial role of wildfires in the ecology of the forest.
We have to learn how to live with fire. Putting out all fires has actually created unhealthy landscapes. So one of our challenges is to learn to live with fire, to allow fire back onto the landscape. So we've already implemented policy and practice in BC. Starting in 2012, we allowed fires in more remote parts of the province to burn as a natural part of our ecosystem, be back on the landscape to give us diversity in the forest, to create natural fuel breaks for when we do have big fires, and to improve the health of the ecosystem.